All right, welcome to our next talk. We have Hubert Drecker from cPro Conlog, and he's going to talk about modern and type-safe OData handling and a generator that was born out of a desire to handle OData queries in a type-safe way. So, please.
Thank you very much. I just directly go into it without any agenda. So the question is why? We have the OData server in the middle. This might be you using UI5, and your use case is usually you using the OData model for OData communication as well as state. As soon as we add TypeScript to the mix, we have one problem. We want types for our data models, and this is what odata2ts can give you. The second use case is that you have a different tech stack, like React, Angular, stuff like that, and using the UI5-Webcomponents. This was our initial use case. And of course, you have TypeScript as well. And in this case, you have the problem, hey, I need an OData client. And actually, there are not so many cool libraries for that out there in the world, surprisingly. So what do you get? From odata2ts, of course, you get the TypeScript types for your complete OData model. You get two different versions, one for editing, one for the query response. And you also get additional types. So in this case, this is the use case for TypeScript and UI5. On the other hand, you have the full-fledged OData client, which allows for navigation and exploration. We see that later on. It supports all CRUD methods and all custom operations, and powers it supports a powerful and type-safe query builder and different HTTP clients. And yeah, this would be for this use case. So how does it work? To just give you a simple overview of that, we start with the EDMX model. And the cool thing about that, it's free. And then we have the generator, odata2ts. It's in the name. You know that it's a generator. It provides a type-safe configuration, or you provide the configuration. And in the end, it produces a domain multiple domain-specific TypeScript artifacts. It supports OData V2 and V4, and can handle multiple OData services. From a usage standpoint, you just import it and then use the types and have gained more type safety at that point. Otherwise, you also need to initialize the OData client. Then you get type safe and fluent APIs, as well as all the domain knowledge which is there in the OData service. What does it entail? Just to give you an overview as well here. For all use cases, you have to install the generator. It's a NPM dependency, but since it's a dev dependency, you don't need UI5 tooling modules, for example. It's just part of the build chain of yours. So no additional imports, or no, it doesn't affect your UI5 build or UI5 app. You need to create a config file. As you can see, it's already in TypeScript. Then you need to establish a certain routine, download the metadata whenever the server changes, and run the generator whenever the metadata or the configuration changes. This obviously depends on how often your server changes. I mean, if it's fully developed, then you do it once. Otherwise, if you're just developing it, you do it multiple times. And then this affects the build configuration as well. Two options I see here at that point. There might be more, of course. The typical stuff would be we generate all the artifacts when building, and then exclude all the generated stuff from Git and integrated that into the build chain. However, if the server doesn't change, you can just as well just commit the generated stuff. Yes, please. Does the metadata downloaded, or is it possible to just define it? The metadata has to be downloaded currently. At some point, I want to add a URL, but it's actually so easy. You just point it there. It's an XML file. You download it. For other use cases than just the typing, you install additional dependencies and have a different configuration. And that's it. That's the complete stuff you need to do. So otherwise, you can just read the getting started guides, which we have. Short overview of the stats, like you would take a look at GitHub. It's an open source project. Ain't on GitHub. It has an MIT license, so you can use it commercially or however you like. And the spirit is that that we adhere to the OData specification as much as possible, but we also support workarounds for faulty implementations. Yeah, and the most important thing, stability matters. So we have a lot of unit and integration tests. The key facts are here for you to read. Yeah, the code coverage is quite high and also really important at that point. Otherwise, we have the documentation. This took a lot of effort, actually, so you can see it. We have all those getting started guides here. You would see it in detail what you need to do, as well as for the full-fledged OData client. So it's all documented in here. Okay. Now we come to the first use case. It's generating types. And we start with a configuration. The minimal configuration would look like this. As you can see, it's all based on TypeScript. So you get a dedicated type for the configuration and also enums for some of the options. In this case, we only want to produce typings for the models. And hence, we only need the DTS files, so the compiled typings in the end. We have different modes in there, but that's all you need for that use case. And what you always need to specify is the source file, so the downloaded EDMX. And you need to specify the output folder. And this one gets wiped, so don't use source or something like this. So how does it look like when we generate those types? For entity and complex types, the EDMX looks like this. So this is what we get. This is, but this is only one version. This is the response model mapping. So what you would get in return from any query to the OData service. Let's take a look at it. First off, the entity and property names remain the same, which should be the case in anyway, because you're just using the OData model to get all your stuff, so they must remain the same. Otherwise, we see that props are nullable by default. So only those properties which are required are marked as nullable false, and you see the username here, for example, will evaluate to the concrete type. Otherwise, you always have string or null, or you always have the nullable type. Collection properties are non-nullable arrays. And last but not least, we have entity relationships, which can be undefined. You have to expand them in the OData query, otherwise you don't get it. And as you can see on the left-hand side, at least it's indicated by the comments, we support all the model types, from primitive types, complex types, enums, entity relationships. They're not all available in V2, but yeah, we support it. So one other type we generate is the entity ID type, and each entity must have an ID. That's must have. And that's also the main difference to a complex type. We have seen this in the previous example, but here again, you see the key property, which references the username property at that point. Here we have to differentiate between two concepts. An entity can have a single key, typically like an ID. And on the other hand, we have a composite key when it's made up out of multiple properties. This is how this would look like. These types are generated as well. And they're used to address the entity. So the first example with a handling unit has a complex key, and this is exactly what the type also says. And for single key entities, we can also use, you can always use the complex form, of course, but we also have a short form because that's what OData allows. And if you would use the service or the generated OData client, you can create those keys exactly like the type says. So here you see what gets returned. And the library behaves exactly like you specified. If you use the short form, we actually generate the short form, otherwise the complex. Okay, let's return to entity and complex types because we generate a little bit more. We generate a second version of the data model, and it's used for update and create operations. This is how this would look like. I don't know how much TypeScript you know, but if you don't know pick, partial, and stuff like that, these are TypeScript utility types. I highly recommend to learn them. In this special case, it means that we take all the optional attributes and convert them to a type which allows them to be not defined at all. So when you have an edit model, you don't need to define optional properties, not at all. So this is the difference between the response model. You always get all the properties, but either they are null or filled. And on the other hand, if you call the create action, you don't have to specify those optional properties. That's one difference. And the other one is managed properties don't get included. Question is, what are managed properties? Managed properties are managed by the server. Typical examples are ID, created at, modified at, stuff like that. They shouldn't be submitted to the server. Hence, they must be excluded for all those editable for create and update actions. odata2ts handles this with one simple automatism. Single keys are managed by default. So if you have a single key, it's an ID, you don't have to do anything. It will get excluded from the editable model version. However, in other cases, and in general, you might want to configure this. We see this later on. Okay, one of the most important types, one of the most important things are the data types and how they are represented in JSON. And odata2ts adheres to the OData specification, which is rather unfortunate, maybe. This is the V2 mapping. So this is really how the OData specification works, and odata2ts just adheres to it. So whenever you have something like the numeric types, most of them are strings actually. Only EDMX 16 and 32 are mapped as numbers. And as you can see, daytime, time, so all the special types, they all follow a certain format, but in the end, they are just strings. In OData V4, it's a little bit different. You see that all numeric types are mapped as number, which is also not completely correct. EDMX 64 as well as decimal might be larger than a JavaScript number type. So, but this is a different story. And as you can see, I don't know how much you know about V2 and V4. The difference here are different data types. So we so data dispensed with the daytime type because it was always very, very special, and just use the daytime offset, which is the ISO 861001 format. Date and time of day have been invented. Previously, we only had EDM time, and EDM time has a unfortunate specification. It's specified as duration, actually. This might work. You can say time of day is a subset of a duration, but it comes with its own problems. And they fixed it in the V4 version. You see, you have time of day now, and you have a concrete duration format. If you've never read the format, it's just P stands for period, and then you have years, month, days, and this time delimiter, and then comes your time. Okay, this is not what you usually want, and not what you usually get in the OData model. So let's talk about data type conversion, and odata2ts offers converters for this use case. They are grouped into packages, which are own NPM modules. So you just install them regularly via NPM. And they are the real implementation of the conversion logic. So even if you're just interested in the correct types, they still can do the conversion because it's so easy to convert stuff. The existing converters that are offered, you can see them here, but the one which is most interesting for this day is the UI5 V2 converter, and it manages to bridge the gap to UI5, and you get the compatibility with the UI5 OData model. And just to be sure, it's really this kind of OData model I'm talking about. And this is how this is mapped. So you see the daytime offset are mapped to dates. The EDM time is a very special format, and the basic numeric types are also mapped as numbers. So as soon as you install this converter, you will have compatibility with the OData model. And you can always roll your own converter because there's a converter RB to implement. The configuration for all those use cases, for the managed properties, you see that we have that you can disable the simple automatism, that single keys are excluded, especially for the trip-in service, legendary or public OData service. Since this is a demo service, you need to create those IDs on the client side, which is unusual. But here you see how you can disable this logic. And on the other hand, you can manually provide managed properties. Here, for example, modified add, modified by, and you just say, hey, they're managed true. That's it. On the other hand, we have converters. The configuration you would see here. So you just name the package. And if you do so, you use all the default converters from this converter package. It's documented on each converter. And you also have the possibility to define individual converters out of this package. If I want to use Luxon and I only want this one converter and not the other ones, then I use this kind of syntax. And you will find the ID of this kind of converter also at the GitHub pages of the modules. And you should never forget to install those dependencies. More configuration. There's one issue with V2 and expanded collections. And since we're talking also about UI5, I just wanted to mention it. There might be two different structures. On the one hand, the first one you see, this is what odata2ts does by default. And the second one you can get by using this configuration. But this is only needed when you only interested in types. As soon as you use the OData client or any other step in between, then you get a built-in runtime conversion for that case. Just to mention it because it happens. Some OData services do this and others don't. Renaming stuff, you can actually rename nearly anything which gets generated. If you want to rename the entity interfaces, you can do this individually, also via regular expression. And you can also change naming schemes. For example, when we have a person, it would get generated like this. However, Some people like to prefix interfaces with I. This is the configuration, how this would look like. And the same goes for any other artifact. Actually, you can rename nearly anything. Okay. The second use case is the OData client. And I should say that there's always a middle ground. You can use the OData client, you can use the type generation, but these are the extremes, and there are different use cases in between. You could also take only some stuff out of what you see now with the OData client. Setup in initialization. Now we add runtime dependencies. At that point, if you're using UI5, you would need UI5 tooling modules, which have been named a couple of times today, I think. With these UI5 tooling modules, you can use NPM modules in your UI5 apps. So you have to install this, and you have to choose one of the HTTP clients. And I've never thought I would meet jQuery again, but for UI5, I created an jQuery HTTP client. You just put it in. So there's no dependency on jQuery, actually. It's just you can use it as you have it in UI5. The configuration would look a little bit different. You say mode as service, and yeah, you can allow the renaming now. The renaming of properties, for example. This is how this would get initialized. You see this trip-in service comes from a build folder. And the Axios client, in this case, it's not the jQuery client, has just been imported from the typical NPM package. Then you provide the base URL as well. And here you see that the trip-in service you initialize it with the HTTP client and this base URL. And that's it. After that, you can use it. So OData has a special navigation concept. Yeah, we have entry points with entity sets and singletons. You would see it here, for example, airlines, airports, people. These are entity sets, and me is a singleton. Depends on whether it's a collection or just one type entity. Yeah, here you see the auto-completion for a single entity, or for the entity here, people roughly wide, or for the complete entity collection. And you can already spot some CRUD methods like create or query. And here you have delete, update, patch, stuff like that. More important is that we have navigation properties defined in OData. And this now allows to go arbitrarily deep into the OData service. And here would be an example for this. So we navigate to a certain person, go to his best friend, then select the trips, and now we can do a query there, stuff like that. So you build up the complete path with the help of odata2ts, and you don't need to know the path anymore, which you usually provide. So let's talk about querying. It's one of the most powerful features of odata2ts. Yeah, but first, let's talk about the response and how it looks like. First off, you see that it's promise-based here with a async await style. So you get back a promise. What else? And you get a dedicated response object, which has the response status, response headers, and of course the response data, which is the most important stuff of the response. And then you have a certain structure, but this depends on A, on the OData version, and B, on the targeted type, if you have a collection, entity, simple property, or whatever. And this is how it looks like. Okay, but let's go to the query builder itself. And this is how a query would look like. Now, instead of just calling query, you provide one important thing, a callback function. The first parameter is the builder you get provided with, and the second one is the query object. So this is a functionally blown object, a counterpart to the real entity. And last but not least, you should always return the builder. Currently, you don't need to do it, but in the future, you will have to do it. The builder brings all the system query options you can name: filter, order by, search in V4. They're all there. And you use the query object, then it's an optional attribute, but you would use it whenever you do filtering, because it allows to do type-safe filtering. As you can see here, the age is a number or a numeric field, so you have to use a number. Whenever it's a string or something else, you would use that. And with the help of the converters, if it's a date, you would really use a JS data type and put it in there. So this all works. Yeah, the query objects are also used for sorting. And at some points you see that they are only just strings, but actually they are also type safe because they're using the keys of the entity. Actually, it's quite powerful. So there was some heavy documentation going on. As you can see here on the right-hand side, we have really quite a lot of stuff in here. We also see an expand, filter, count, top, skip, order by, search if you've used it in V4. And you also get the logical operators like or, and, not, stuff like that. Filtering is even more special. Here you would see the typical operations like equals. They are always, I doubled the names, EQ, like in OData and equals, to write them out. You also see arithmetic operators. I still don't know why you would use them, but they are there. And number functions or string functions. We actually also we emulate an in operator. This is only rolled out as an OR concatenation, but it's there. So it's also available for V2 and V4. V4 knows an in operation by itself, but yeah, we emulate that. Okay. CRUD and custom operations. We've already talked about the read stuff. So this is how create, update, and delete look like. Yeah, they of course use the editable model versions, and it's always called patch. In V2, it's a merge because it was invented before patch was conceptualized from the HTTP spec, but who cares? It's always, in case of doubt, it's always V4 syntax. We also have custom operations. Here you would see some. So they are really translated to functions with parameters, still type safe. We can use unbound function, and V4 only knows unbound functions. V2 only knows unbound. V4 brings unbound actions into the play and also bindings to the entity or the collection. There's one wrap special in here. They don't have unbound operations. They always have bound. The entities bound either to the actions and functions are either bound to the collection or the entity. Just to mention it here. Conclusion. So what have we have seen? First, the use case of the type generation. So you get all the types, you have a response model, you have an editable model, you get the entity ID type. You can also configure the generator as to not generate those types. You can just turn it off. And you've seen a flexible and powerful generator, which allows for data type conversion, managed properties, and other stuff. It has a lot of options, actually. And Andreas Kunz has written a blog article, which I can recommend. He shows how this looks like for an existing app. Wow, sorry. And we have also seen the second use case of the OData client. It allows you to navigate through the OData service It gives you full querying capabilities with a dedicated query builder. We've seen CRUD and custom operations. Now, the benefits of odata2ts are that, yeah, first of all, it's highly modular. And you've seen this with these two use cases, but there are more in between. So you can also use just the query builder, for example, if you want to. So you use only what you need, actually. And there are extension points, A for the HTTP clients and B for the converters. So you can always roll your own. It's extensible. And whenever you do, I would gladly accept any kind of converter or HTTP client, just reach out. The most important thing is that it abstracts away a lot of OData knowledge, especially when it comes to URL building, but also that you don't have to specify the path and that you don't need to know the paths is quite a benefit, would say. And it streamlines the V2 and V4 usage. In most cases, you would always see the V4 syntax. I've given you one example for querying, for example. V2 would know something like a deep select. Do we have it in here? Something like this. And then you always need to remind yourself that you also need to do the expand. Instead of doing this, we just use the V4 syntax, which is much, much cooler. And here we have the complex expanding, and this should look familiar. So you again have the builder and the query object in here, but then now you can do the selecting at this deeper stage, and you don't need to know that you need to expanding as well. So this syntax is much, much nicer. So yeah. In any case, most of the time, it's always a full V4 syntax, and behind the scenes, you get the correct V2 syntax. It's a kind of a developer-first approach. It's type safe and fluent. I made it for myself, so I wanted to use it. So I really paid attention that it's quite cool. And you should be in complete control. It's a little bit different than what UI5 sometimes does. So there's no magic involved. It's always the same. So whatever you do, I've shown you how it works, and this is how it works. There's no special cases involved. There's no extra syntax you need to do. It's just this, and this is my definition of simplicity. It doesn't mean that it's the most convenient way in all cases, but it's simple. It's always the same. You always do the same stuff. As you have seen, for example, with this expanding, you already know that you get the builder and the query object, and if you expand, it's the same again. Yeah. Thank you so much. And short, yeah. For collaboration, I wanted to thank to UI5's live team. They helped me a lot with that stuff, for sponsoring my company, my employer, because they sponsored me this day and time to spend on the project. And for inspiration, all this query object stuff I know from Query DSL and Juke. These are Java libraries which do querying stuff with a database, because I love this kind of concept. This is how query object entered into odata2ts. One of the main reasons I created this, because I wanted to have this kind of query objects. That's it.
Thanks a lot. Do we have any questions in the audience? Oh, yeah. Guy in the first row.
Like always. I haven't seen the Boolean type in the EDM type table conversion.
Yeah.
Is it supported or just missing?
Yeah, it's supported.
Okay. Is it off string or native?
EDM string and EDM Boolean, they are mapped to string and Boolean. Yeah.
And Boolean native, yeah? Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Someone's paying attention. Nice. Any other questions? If no, I think you were very thorough and you covered it all. So thanks again. And yeah, have a nice round of applause.